That's what I'm talking about. How cool is that? And we didn't touch a pan knob. We barely touched any volumes. Listen to how much more low energy there is, and listen to how there's so much more presence in the middle now. If you're anything like me, you probably struggled with really kind of defining how much EQ you feel your mix needs. And sometimes might have found yourself in a position where even after a whole host of EQ moves, the mix still either felt too cluttered, felt too masked, or felt too thin. Or you may be struggling with having your mixes translate to different listening environments. You're not alone. What I did to help overcome these things was take some inspiration from some of my favorite mixers, where I would hear about how they would have a whole host of different speakers that they would monitor their mix on. The single cube Oratone, the NS10s, which are very mid-range heavy, and it got me thinking that really it's not so much about the speakers, it's rather about changing our ear perspective to focus in on different frequency zones, which is what these engineers are doing, whether consciously or subconsciously. So I developed for myself a system using a FabFilter Pro MB to break my mix down into what I consider to be 4 critical zones. So we're going to hop inside the DAW. I'm going to show you how to set this up, and I'm going to show you how to use this in your own mix work to better enhance your decisions. Because listening in frequency zones isn't about isolating frequencies, it's about isolating your decision making. So let's hop in a DAW and see what we're up to. There's a reason great engineers don't listen to mixes the same way beginners do. Andrew Sheps once said, if you don't know what you're listening for, you're not really listening. And that idea completely reframed mixing for me. When you listen to the entire frequency spectrum at once, your brain can get overstimulated. Everything is competing for attention. That's when EQ has the ability to become guesswork instead of decision making. Working in frequency zones changes that. It focuses your ear, it reduces stimulation, and over time it actually trains you to hear these balances instinctively when you go back to full range listening. In a way, this is no different than why engineers switch speakers. Michael Brower talks about perspective all the time, changing monitors, rooms, references so that the ear can reset. Listening in zones does the same thing. It gives you multiple perspectives without ever leaving the mix position. Each zone forces a different question. Is the foundation solid? Can the mix breathe? Will it translate? Does it fatigue? And here's the part that changed everything for me. When you turn a fader up, you turn everything up, the good and the bad. But when you EQ, you're effectively turning up or down only the part of the sound that matters. So for example, if a snare feels too loud because 250 hertz is masking that frequency zone, pulling the fader down kills the crack and the excitement of the snare drum while addressing the fact 250 hertz might be a little overbearing. But cutting a little 250 keeps the energy, keeps the presence, and actually lets the mix get louder without collapsing in upon itself. That's real loudness, and that's real presence. And that's why great mixes feel powerful without feeling crowded. Once you start hearing your mix in zones, EQ stops being about fixing problems and starts being about preserving your intention. So I had set up a training session for myself quite some time ago, and I go back to this weekly. It's, don't judge me please, called EJ's Taste Muscles.
Really?
I figure if I don't have real muscles in real life, I can have muscles in the Pro Tools and audio engineering world. But I set up a Pro MB into 4 zones, which we'll discuss in a minute. And then I loaded up tons of my favorite songs, which I can't play today because I'll most likely get flagged, but it's a lot of mixes that I love from all different genres. And I did import another mix that I can play so you can hear what it's like being filtered through the zones. Now these 4 zones, I've given each one a name. And for the first zone, which essentially is from 0 up to 100 hertz, I call the outside the club zone. In this zone, what we're really hearing is the pressure, the pulse, the intent, and the energy of our mix. We're not really looking for notes or vocals. Essentially, it's like we're hearing the music from outside a club. Some of the questions that we want to ask ourselves when listening in this zone is, does the mix feel grounded? Can we feel all that low energy? Does the low energy feel intentional, or does it feel chaotic? Meaning, am I hearing a lot of definition in that area and fullness, or am I just hearing a lot of overly resonant frequencies kind of just colliding into each other? The next question I can answer in this is, who is the anchor? Is it the bass guitar? Is it a synth? Is it a kick drum? Who's anchoring this area? And the last thing you can ask yourself is, does the music know what it's doing? down in this area, what it's supposed to be, what its identity is. The way that I tend to use this in this particular area is I'll solo up that band and I will listen to all the different reference mixes, kind of noticing how each engineer or each song handles this area, and take note when I'm working on these zones for myself. So here's a quick example of the song that I'm going to play without the zones applied. So you're going to get just a quick burst of the song itself.
All I wanna do is sleep.
Just very kind of Green Day, very mid-range and punchy and powerful. So now let's listen to zone 1, the outside the club zone. So here, it's clear that the bass guitar is holding down most of this frequency. So the choice was made for the bass guitar to be the low-end anchor of this mix. I'm not hearing anything overly resonant. I'm not hearing anything that feels dramatically out of balance. So to me, when I'm listening to this, I feel like I'm listening to the song outside of a club. It doesn't feel out of shape to me. The second zone is the one that we've all been taught to fear, which essentially for me here is about 180 up to 400. We often call that mud. But the thing that I want you to realize, and I really hope that you get from this video, is that mud isn't too much of this frequency range. It tends to be one or maybe two elements in this zone hijacking it. And if we just go and cut this from every instrument or just cut it globally from a mix, we can be thinning out our mix or losing some power or some punch unknowingly. So with this particular zone, I call this zone the blanket over the speaker zone. And what we're getting from it is a lot of smearing and warmth. That's what we're really looking for ideally. What we're not going to get from this zone is a lot of articulation or transience. So some questions that we want to ask ourselves when we're listening in this zone is the mix feeling congested, or does it feel like it's breathing? Is the warmth supporting clarity, or is it kind of choking it out? So is there too much, resonance? Is there too much saturation down in that area? Are there too many overtones that are kind of blocking things out, or is it making things feel glued together? Now, if I had this mix session up and the ears that I have right now were hearing it, I probably would go through and maybe just balance a little bit of that snare drum resonance. But overall, we're hearing the guitars balanced, we're hearing the bass balanced, we're hearing the vocal, and it just kind of sounds like we have a blanket sitting over the speakers. So to me, that tells me, especially when referencing all my other favorite mixes up here and knowing what that zone sounds like, that I'm in a good spot. And that's one of the things that I really want you to take your time doing, is listening to mixes that you really look up to, mixes that you aspire to get your work to sound like, and really listen to how these areas are handled. The next one is the area that I call New York City, because if you make it here, you make it everywhere. So basically, if this zone works where you're listening, it will work everywhere. And essentially, what we're asking ourselves in this area is, can the mix speak without the real low end, like the bass, and without the top end, like the air? Does the mix still speak? So let's take a listen.
All I wanna do is sleep.
Cool. Very forward, very punchy, and we hear it. It just sounds like we're listening to the mix on a very small speaker system. And this is why it's critical, because this zone is what really helps you get your iPhone, your AirPod, your TV, laptops, a lot of that kind of translation, small TVs, I should say, and making sure that all the main things that should be intelligible are. So when you're working in this zone, the questions that you want to ask yourself are the vocals clear and intelligible? Ding, ding, da, like Captain Obvious, right? And in that one it was. And does the groove survive on mid-range alone? And now we have our last zone up here. And this zone I call the ghost zone. It's essentially what's left when you're playing your mix at very, very, very low volumes. And this to me is one of the areas that we can really struggle with, because if we're saturating a lot of stuff, or we're brightening everything up, we can really make this area very, very harsh. So the questions that we want to ask when we're listening in this area is, first and foremost, is the mix too fatiguing on our ear? Like, if I listen to this for more than 4 or 5 seconds, is it feel like it's piercing my eardrums? If so, we have some problems. Is the presence intentional or accidental in this area? Meaning, am I just getting a lot of just kind of fizz guitar energy and overbearing cymbal energy in there? Or am I hearing, very carved sound sources speaking in that frequency range? And last, which is kind of really just piggybacking on those 2 points, is, does this area sparkle or stab? And that's really what we're looking at. And right now in this area, what we're going to get mostly is sibilance, transient click. So you're going to hear just kind of the clicking of the snare drums, or maybe the top of the kick, a lot of pick attack. So it's a lot of things that aren't, in long durations, very pleasing to our ear, which is why I find this area for me to be very, very good to check. Pat myself on the back a little bit on that one. That's a nice zone. That might be for this particular mix, my favorite zone of the 4. It feels smooth. It's not harsh on my ears. I can keep listening to it. I could hear all the instruments, and I'm not getting anything that is really kind of drowning out the mix or the song from revealing itself through this particular zone. And that's really the case, is you want to feel like you're still getting the song in each zone, and that's important. So I set up an example in another session that we're going to hop into, and I'm going to show you how you can use this on the fly. So we are back with a mix that I set up here for demonstration purposes. The raw tracks, I imported my mix template, and I'll go through it just really fast in case you're curious. There is 0 processing, so here's all the drums. The bass, I mult my bass into a low and a high, but there's no processing on the bass except to create those mults. Here's the guitars. There were just 2 guitars in a session, no processing. It just feeds into a guitar sum. And then there's just 1 vocal, no processing on it again. It feeds into my vocal sends. We don't have any EQ. We have just my stock compressor, so we're gonna get a little compression. But if you remember from my previous videos, it flows downhill to a drum collector, an instrument collector, a vocal mix collector, and then they feed into my vibe console and my Sheen bus. So the vibe console is basically my analog circuitry, like I'm running it through a desk. And then the Sheen bus is essentially my mastering process, and then that hits my print bus where I print into the mix. Just some things of note, I am running it through my analog API compressor and my pair of Pultecs. This is essentially the mix, raw, no tracks individually processed, hitting all my summing, and I'll play you a snippet of the song as it stands with just only hitting my mix processing. So if I was setting an intention for this, like we talked about in the previous video, it would be aggressive. So the goal would be to mix this very aggressive. And as you can see, even when we just pull it up and run it through, like it's a pretty good sounding mix to start with. It's probably what the band lived with before the final mix. But now let's look. So down here on my print bus, out of the way of all my processing, I have my zones. So let's see if we can go through and use these zones to improve this mix at all. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to solo the low band where we're looking, our outside the club, where we're looking for our energy, our pulse, and let's see what's going on there. I would like a little more weight in the kick drum, just listening in this zone. It feels a little light down here. And also the bass guitar feels way too low to me. The energy isn't there where I feel like it's really resonating. So that's the only things I want to do. So we're going to make 2 quick moves. We'll pull up a Fab Filter Q3. I'm going to sweep this little area around here, around 30 to 40 hertz, and see if I can find a spot I like. And then I'm also going to just put a trim plug in. So the other thing that I'm hearing is when those toms hit, there is a little bit of over resonance down there. They're kind of ringing. So for our outside the club zone, we only made 3 moves. We boosted a little bit of weight in the kick because we felt like it needed it. We brought the low end of the guitar up significantly and also filtered out a little bit of the tom that was ringing down there. Other than that, now it sounds nice and it sounds balanced to me. So now we're going to look at the second zone. So what I'm getting here is the snare shell is a little bit overbearing. The guitars feel a little thin to me here. And one of the guitars, I'm hearing a little bit too much resonance. It's kind of like washing out the definition that I want. And the vocal volume feels a little bit low to me. So we might need a little bit of energy in this area. And this is probably a good spot for me to also discuss the fact that like one of the issues that we might have here is when we're listening to a vocal, right, and we're deciding what to EQ, EQ is volume. So it's like being able to, inside each one of these areas, to balance the volumes by using EQ. You want something louder, you can boost those frequencies in that range on a source. You want them lower, you can go and cut. So we're going to go and cut something from the snare drum, and I'm going to keep it playing while I do. So it's not necessarily going through and cutting everything. It's that this frequency is just over ringing. So let's bring it down now and get it to kind of sit right inside this zone. It's all it took. Now let's move on to the guitars in the same zone. First thing I'm going to do is when I'm EQing guitars, I keep this guy on in bypass, nothing's happening. So I'm going to play with this because I feel like when we're listening inside each zone, something else that's important is you could think of this like a mini mix. Like there's a low end to this zone, there's mids, and there's a top end. And I'm going to try to get a feel for where I would need the guitars to speak the most. And I'm going to kind of work between 250 and 500. So I'm going to move this up to +3, and I'm going to get a sense of which one I like better when I bring this in. Now, I personally like 500. 250 is nice. It gives it some nice like weight in that area, but it's also kind of fighting the snare drum a little bit. Listen again. When I toggle between two and 500, it gives it a little bit, what feels like a little bit more width to me. And I'm still getting some good like energy, like low energy presence. It's the guitar in my left ear that I'm hearing that's kind of bugging me. So I'm going to solo that for a second, and I'm going to figure out what in this zone needs to come out. I'm not sure if you caught that, but basically it's just allowing, you're hearing a little bit more of the drive where before that frequency was just kind of washing out a little bit too much of that definition. Okay, so now moving on to the vocal. The vocal feels a little low. It feels a little unrepresented in this area. The singer might not have a lot going on in this, so I'm not looking to push stuff that's not there, which is very important. So one thing we'll first do is we'll play it and we'll kind of bring this up and see if there's something here, which there just very well might not be. So what I'm going to do instead is bring the volume up a little bit. I went back to the second guitar, the guitar in the right channel, as I was hearing a little bit of resonance in one of those riffs. So wanted to correct that, but I'm good for that for now. Now let's move on to our New York City zone. You can make it here, you can make it anywhere. This is our iPhone, these are our small speakers. This is the intelligibility test. Are we hearing the entire mix here right now? And I'm gonna play it, I'm gonna try and get some ideas. So just two quick things I'm getting. One, there's no kick drum whatsoever. So we're gonna go back to our kick EQ, and we are gonna probably boost like 2K. Okay, so you can hear we got the kick showing up now and there. Now, the other thing is the guitars. The guitars are a little harsh in this area for my taste. Now, maybe you're like, I love those guitars. Don't touch anything.
Stay back.
For me, and my version of this mix that I'd be giving to the client, I am going to do a little work on the guitars. So I'm just going to pull up another fab filter for this. And I'm hearing some like 2K and like 4K-ish area that might be kind of bothering me, and then I'm just going to dip a little bit of 3K global in this Trident. Now we are also going to do a little carving up here. If you listen, you can hear just a little bit of like the shimmer on the top of the guitars, but not like in a good way, like all that extra fizz that's kind of like cluttering things up, like just kind of removing and dipping a little bit of that, which doesn't make the top feel so staticky, like shh, like we're listening to like white noise. It's like funneling in through this area and helps take a little stress off our ears, hear the guitars a little clearer, and also allow the vocal to speak. So now let's go on to the last zone here, which is our ghost zone. And for me, one of the toughest. And let's kind of take a listen and see what's up. So clearly an example right here where we're not hearing anything at all in this zone other than some kind of quick passing vocal sibilance and then just all cymbals. So first we're going to do is I'm going to go down to my drums. I'm going to play this again. I'm going to mute. I'm suspecting it's probably the overhead. I'm going to mute it and we're going to see where we're getting most of that cymbal splat from. So you can see how these cymbals are masking the guitar that's in there, because when I mute it, we hear the guitar. So let's go with Fab Filter and let's cut a little bit of, say, 6 and probably 10K. So we're kind of cutting the low end and the very top end of what we would consider to be this zone for the cymbals. And then we're just going to put a de-esser on the vocal. And we haven't even listened to this mix, right? I mean, that was like, I lost track, but that's just a handful of EQ moves. And let's listen to the original version and then follow that with what we just did, which again, this is real time, so it could be a hot mess since we didn't even come out of solo for our Pro MB and just kind of worked inside exclusively each zone. So let's see what we got. That's what I'm talking about. How cool is that? I mean, listen again. Listen to how much wider the mix feels. And we didn't touch a pan knob. We barely touched any volumes. Listen to how much more low energy there is. And listen to how there's so much more presence in the middle now. And we still retained all of that aggressiveness that we wanted from our intent. Because what we're doing now is we're just making some isolated decisions to help win in each one of those zones. And that's really where we get into translation issues, right? Like, I should have by this point in time the right intention, the right energy on my snare drum. The bass should have the right level of grit. The vocal should have the right level of aggressiveness, of distortion, whatever it might be. Same with the guitars. And now, as I have all that and I'm deciding how can I fit things together, it's through working with these zones. One area that's important for loudness is think about the overheads and what we had to do. So if our overhead sound, right, it has just an overbearing amount of 6 to 10K that's kind of blasting everything. And I'm not really thinking in terms of volume in relationship to frequency, but rather just fader volume. I'm gonna feel forced to have to keep my cymbal fader at a certain spot. And if you listen to the first version versus the second, the first version, the cymbals are really spitty and overbearing, but we couldn't push them anymore in the mix for that reason. But then when you cut those frequencies, it allows you to actually push the parts of the cymbal frequency up in the mix that are working, that are speaking, and that have their own space. And that's how we get loudness, because essentially you're not being limited now by, I want to bring the vocal up, because when you bring a fader up, you're bringing up its full spectrum. And that's the difference, or things you want to ask yourself when it comes to, should I reach for an EQ or should I just move a fader? Am I trying to move the full frequency range of what I'm hearing? Or am I trying to help this instrument or this voice have more presence in the mix, but maybe there's frequencies inside that when I'm pushing it up are now blocking or masking other things? So one more quick A/B. That's awesome. It's the reason I love this process. It's helped me move faster. And as you can see, we went through and did maybe 8 moves total. And we're able to keep our focus and our intention on moving the story of the song along. And we're not being hung up in EQ guesswork. Now, I wouldn't encourage you to build your zone template like I've set up here and work like we did for the purpose of this video, where you do not come out of it. It's essentially the opportunity to shift your listening perspective periodic times through your mix process. So I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to drop them in the comments below. If you have any questions regarding my template or some of the things that you're seeing, all the stuff that's showing up here in this video is in previous videos where I did talk about the way that I sculpt out my drums, my vocals, how I have instrument categories, the vibe bus, the sheen bus, all that stuff. But if you do have any questions, feel free to ask. All right, my friends, till next time.